Hello everyone and welcome back. Got an interesting one for you today. I saw this patient a few months ago and was just told to evaluate for root canal on 14 and tooth was fine, tested normal. You can see it's definitely deep as far as the filling, but she was still filling well, ready for get the bridge. And turns out the dentist team forgot to tell me that they had actually exposed the pulp. So a few months later, we saw her back and now the tooth's starting to hurt and we need to go ahead and take care of this with a root canal. Now, the tooth has already been prepared for the bridge and she is going to the referrals office right after this. A few have asked how I do the bite block and the rubber dam. So here's the bite blocks that I use. They're the Logic blocks. I love these. They have the side cut out of them and they make such a difference for this sort of thing. And when I'm placing the clamps, pretty much you can see I'm using my left hand to make sure that it is pushed, that ring and the bar in the back is pushed down. That's the most important thing. You can then see me using the mirror here to make sure everything fits. You'll notice I kept this one high. I didn't actually clamp the gingiva, and that's because she's going to get the bridge permanently cemented right after this appointment. So I don't want to traumatize the tooth. So one thing you can do is squeeze using the rubber dam clamp. You can actually squeeze that 2A a little bit tighter so it has a little more gripping force. And even though it's not pretty, it does work in this case, which is super nice. So that way there's no irritation to the gingiva and we can move from there. Now, the other thing you want to consider is your access. You do not want to touch any of the walls. So I'm definitely more to the distal than I normally would be on a maxillary molar like this, but I do not want to touch that mesial wall that her dentist has already prepared. And sorry for the angle here. There wasn't a ton of space, so it's a little bit tough to see, but this is sometimes all we can get when we're working on these posterior teeth. And you can see I'm just kind of troughing, making sure we pick up that MB2, but I'm also being very cognizant that as I'm troughing, you generally, when you're going for MB2, you have to move towards the mesial. I'm trying to be very cognizant of the fact that I do not want to touch that wall, and I want to make sure that I leave a nice solid chunk of composite for the general dentist to bond onto here. So same thing with the distal. Thankfully, there's not a lot. Usually, you're not going to run into any problems whatsoever with the distal or the palatal because there's enough good tooth structure, but the mesials are where you run into problems. You can see the tooth is definitely necrotic there, but we have a nice band of solid composite in that area as I'm working through and getting my 8C down just to start like normal. You can see there is a little bit of calcification inside here. I wasn't quite able to get into the distal buccal immediately. So when you have a calcified tooth like this where you can only find a couple, the first thing you want to do is open up the canals that you've already found. Then you can use the rules of geometry inside the actual tooth to kind of get a much better idea of where that next canal is going to be more likely to be. I have a case that I'm going to be showing probably in the next few weeks on a 96-year-old very calcified tooth, and I'll show you kind of how I manage that as well. Now that we have the two mesials, what I'm doing here is I'm starting to trough. Specifically, you want to kind of create a line between those two mesials, meet halfway, and then push that towards the distal. That's probably the best way I can explain it. I can also draw this if you're interested in this concept, but the idea being that distal is going to be right pretty much smack dab between the MB1 and the MB2. And so by finding these canals first, it makes it much, much easier to grab everything. And if you look right here, at this point, I also have picked up the palatal. I thought I had the distal buccal here. I may have actually cut that out now that I'm looking at this. I promise I found the distal buccal. You'll see in the final, the distal buccal is in there as well. So I think I cut that out when I was editing. But what we're doing now is going to go and finish up the case here. So opened everything up, and we'll see in a second here if I grab the distal buccal, but I'm pretty sure I did. Not sure why that was all wonky. Yeah, there's our MB2. And with this case, it was already pretty calcified, so no need to do too much extra work here. You can see I'm having a little bit of trouble getting down that MB2, so I'm going to get to the point where it starts to bind, finish up with the other two canals and make sure those look great, and then we'll do a little extra work here. And same thing, not really picking it up much. That's one of the tricks too, is if you notice that your file is starting to bend, you can put it down a straight canal and that'll actually re-straighten it back out. That 2006 now is doing some really nice work on the MB2, as you can see. The stopper is where I need to get to, so we're still definitely short in that area, and you'll see me popping back into the MB just to make sure that we stiffen that up and get it nice and clean. The other thing too with MBs is it's sometimes beneficial to go back in, and you can see we dropped down there too. I promise I did the distal. I have no idea where I react to these in real time, so you're seeing along with me that I don't know where the distal is. I promise I filled it. You'll see it here at least with the I extended the squirt technique to give you a little more. A few people have been asking about that, so I gave myself some more time to talk with that technique. But the drying process is exactly what you've seen before. Those MBs look nice and wide open. And you can see, even though MB2 has moved, there's our distal buccal. So I promised I did do stuff on there. I think I just accidentally cut it out when I was doing all the editing. Same thing as normal, use 20K file, recapitulate, just get back down inside there. Make sure that we're clear to the very bottom. That's the most important thing with the squirt fill, is you cannot have any impediments in the way. If you do, the gut aperture will bind there and you will be short. So you have to make sure you take a file of, with a close to what you finished. This was a 17, so a 20 for me works really nicely for the final apical size. And then once you get inside there, you'll notice I filled up the MB1 first, but actually started going down the MB2, and that's because this is a type 2 canal system. So for the type 2 canals, what I generally like to do is, if I see gutta percha coming up the other canal, I'm actually going to go into that one first with my plugger, and then go back into the canal that I filled initially. The reason for that is, generally, that means that the gutta percha wants to kind of pull back up in that area, so that might actually be the straighter canal, and so it's easier then to go back down with your plugger in there. As far as the rest of the technique, it's pretty straightforward. Place the tip, and you want to use a skinny tip here. This is a 25 gauge. You also want to make sure it's very hot, so mine runs at 230, which is the maximum that my unit can do, and I also use soft gutta percha. You want to have something that's going to flow very readily. Once you've placed it inside the canal, for a canal like this that's pretty small, all things considered, it's, I finished it to a 17 with a 2006 overlay. You want to place the tip of the cannula until it binds, and then you back out about a millimeter or so. That way you don't shoot too much stuff out the end of the tooth, which you do run the risk of here. Once you've done that, go ahead and push using the gun until you feel it start to back your cells up. You can see how it pushed me back out there when I was doing the palatal. Pull that out, then go straight in with your plugger. It has to be nickel titanium, so it adapts to the curves inside here. You all know I like to use the B&L one. You want to make that one really small as well, so mine is a 35 at the tip, so pretty skinny there. And on a case like this where I've controlled the canals and they're all 17s pretty much, I'm going to take the plugger down about 2/3 of the way. A decent amount of pressure, not too hard. You want to break the tooth, obviously, but that's pretty much the technique. And then as you start doing more and more cases, you will learn when you should vary that pressure. So when do we need to use more pressure? When do we use less pressure? And you'll kind of figure out as you do more and more cases. And then with these sorts of things where it's skinny, I usually go straight on in with the PacMac, because there is almost always going to be a little bit of a void where you did your first condensation with the plugger. And that's really what this is designed to do. So you don't have to take the PacMac too far down. I usually take it about 1/3, maybe a half if I'm really concerned. And that's the squirt technique in a nutshell. The best way to do it is to do it. So try it on your next case. Let me know how it goes. If there's specific questions you guys have, I'm happy to address them, but that's what the case looks like as far as the inside. So now we're gonna get to the restorative part, and there's some considerations here as well. So we're gonna be using this is actually an older one when I still had the 3-bottle system. So this is Photobond. I realize on all my other videos, I actually have labeled this incorrectly. I've been using Photobond. It said Clearfill SE on it, but when I went to buy the new one, I realized that's actually what we call the 2-bottle system. Anyway, so what we're doing here, I'm going to use just a regular Build It material. You can use your favorite one. In this case, I used Build It. And you want to use the Glick and make sure you don't leave any composite on those axial walls. So now the important part is, how do you prepare this? First thing is to take that flat disc, and pretty much you're going to you can see I'm being very gentle here as far as my brushing strokes. And I just want to get it down to the point that the composite was initially. I had a little bit go around the side here, so I'm going to use my prep burr, and you can see I'm going at a pretty steep angle here because I do not want to touch those margins whatsoever. I'll then polish everything up with the barrel burr as well, just to make sure there's no impediments. And then the final thing we want to do is actually go and slightly under contour that area, and that's what we're doing right here, just to make sure that the composite is lower than what it was beforehand, to make sure everything fits. So that's what the final looks like as far as the case clinically. Radiographically, it looks great from an endo standpoint. I didn't catch this until after. I have a new assistant who hasn't had a ton of experience re-cementing bridges, so she definitely left this one high. Now, I'm not too concerned about it because the patient went right over to the dentist after that to get the permanent crown cemented. So it was high for a maximum of 30 minutes because the doc is very close to me. So as far as this case, I think it turned out really nicely. Just want to give you guys a couple different tips for how to deal with cases where the permanent restoration is already fabricated and they're leaving your office right from there. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. As always, like and subscribe. I'd appreciate every single one of you. And if you have any questions, please drop a comment below and I will talk to you next time.